So, with all the hype and all the discussion that we have had on this YouTube channel about the Montreal Canadiens' first-round picks, really, we've been focusing on one of the first-round picks that was taken in the 2024 NHL Entry Draft. Ivan Demidov has kind of taken over our subconscious. But when it comes to the other guy that the Montreal Canadiens selected in round number 1, there is a very good discussion to be had about one Michael Hage. Let's go out there and talk about his profile, talk about some of the extra things that have been discussed in regards to his potential and whether or not he could be the next Phillip Danault for the team. Yeah, that's a pretty high bar, but it's a pretty interesting one. So, let's go out there and talk more so about the other Canadiens first rounder. Michael Hage, of course, 18 years old, 6'1", 190-pound right-handed center, and he is projected more so as a guy heading into the draft with a lot more potential than initially anticipated. He was drafted by Montreal in the 21st overall spot, and he was projected to go roughly in this range. I say roughly because some scouting outlets had him as high as number 12, others had him as low as number 29. If you average everything out, it works out roughly into that late 10s, early 20s kind of territory, so he went roughly where he was supposed to go. This previous season, though, Hage had 75 points in 54 games played, and 4 points in 2 games with the Chicago Steel in the USHL. We did note this in the video when Hage was initially drafted, but the Canadiens have kind of steered clear of the USHL the past few years. Sure, there are some of the extra later round picks that get taken from there, the Pitlicks and the Farrells, but for the most part, USHL hockey isn't really touched by Montreal mostly, and a lot of people were kind of interested in seeing this connection be made over here. But even though Hage is from Ontario, and even though he was a Montreal Canadiens French-speaking fan growing up, he did decide to go to the USHL to go to college, and of course we recognize that if he had went through the OHL or the QMJHL, his college eligibility would have been forfeited. His intention is to go to the University of Michigan Wolverines in a little bit, so we'll see him take that path and do his thing over there. But in this video, what I wanted to do was go over an article published on danslescoulisses.com, because this piece by Médéric Lefebvre goes out there and talks about some comments made by Simon Snake Boisvert. This article will be linked in the description, and the title is this: Boisvert says that Michael Hage will be better than Phillip Danault. That is a pretty big claim, but let's go out there and give the benefit of the doubt here. The source is the Tony Marinaro Sick podcast, which of course featured Boisvert on the show. But let's go out there and read what the article says here. When Tony Marinaro claimed that Michael Hage is a little better than Phillip Danault, Boisvert responded by explaining that Danault is an excellent defensive center, who is also capable of producing a little bit offensively, but that Hage is much better in attack than Danault. Boisvert finds Hage has an excellent shot, superb skating, and very good puck control. The Snake has high expectations for Michael Hage, but is not necessarily in a top 6 role. Indeed, he sees Hage as the Canadiens' third center on a team that would have a chance to win the Stanley Cup. However, he could also imagine this player on the second line if necessary. In front of Michael Hage, Boisvert obviously sees Kirby Dach and Suzuki. On the third line, he expects to see Hage produce at a rate of 40 or 50 points a season, which is excellent for a third-line player. If the Canadiens wanted to play Hage on the second line instead, Boisvert would expect production in the region of 60 points a year. We must not forget that the Canadiens' 21st overall pick is an excellent player in his own zone. He is capable of putting pressure on opposing players and recovering pucks. In addition to all the qualities mentioned above, Michael Hage grew up a Canadiens fan, so he might have some extra motivation to give his all to help his childhood team win. Now, the interesting thing about that is, when it comes to centers, I think it would be fair to say that before the 2024 draft came and went, most Canadiens fans would have projected the third-line center into the future to being a guy like Owen Beck, for example. Defensively minded, shutdown defenseman, he can penalty kill, he can also score some points, but once Michael Hage got his name inserted into the mix, a lot of people started to open their eyes and say, wait a minute, this guy might have a little bit more offensive flair to his game, and he is debatably as good, if not better, defensively. Now, this Phillip Danault conversation has been brought up by the folks over on the Sick podcast, and it's one that I think is interesting enough to talk about, mostly because Phillip Danault, as we recognize, was one of the most unorthodox first-line centers in the NHL at a given period. He was the top-line guy for Montreal in that 2020-2021 season, but even though he didn't produce 70, 80 points a year, he was still thrusted into that role, and a lot of people said he excelled in it. I'd say that he was one of the only pure top-line, defensively-minded centers that strictly focused on that aspect of the game. Like, sure, two-way centers, you have a lot of them in the NHL that were very good at both ends of the ice. Patrice Bergeron, Alex Barkov, lots of guys there. But these players also could produce absolutely elite point production. Phillip Danault didn't really do that, and it's not really his fault, it's just the way that he plays the game. He focused so much on defending and being the guy in front that you didn't really need Phillip Danault to score points in order for him to be effective. The season when the Montreal Canadiens went to the Stanley Cup Finals, Phillip Danault had 4 points in 22 games played. But everybody loved this guy, because his role was so defined. Go out there, shut down your opposing team's first-line players, and just let the other guys do the work. And that's what he did. He was near perfect in that respect, and it got the Canadiens to the Stanley Cup Finals. Now, of course, that's not to discredit the defensive shutdown abilities of guys like Carey Price and Shea Weber and Ben Sherratt, you know, it's all up in there. But Phillip Danault was an absolutely lethal, defensively-minded guy, a purely, strictly defensively-minded center. Michael Hage, if you wanted to say his defensive ability projects similarly, or maybe just a shade below Phillip Danault's, but with a lot more offense attached to it too, all of a sudden you're looking at a guy that might as well have been valued in the mid-first round, like some of the scouting outlets at the draft floor stage said that he should have been. I mean, there were some going out there immediately saying, hey, this is an amazing pickup for Montreal. This guy could have gone a lot earlier. As his career goes on, as he becomes a Michigan Wolverine, and as he starts demonstrating his value at higher levels of play, you're going to note that this guy has pretty much all the tools to succeed as a prime third-line center, or maybe even a very okay second-line center. I'd think long-term you would want to have Suzuki Doc as your 1-2, so getting a guy like Michael Hage to max out as a third-line player, if he's as good as Phillip Danault defensively, but who can still produce more points than Danault, then all of a sudden you're thinking about a really stacked Montreal Canadiens center core. Of course, you'd project Suzuki and Doc to be able to improve as well and get their point production and numbers up, but Michael Hage on the third line makes a lot of sense, especially when you think about what other options the Canadiens have. If you have Owen Beck and he pans out and he goes from the projected third-line guy to a fourth-line guy, then you might have yourselves one of the best fourth-line centers in the NHL. You might have some of the best bottom six centers in the NHL if you have Hage and Beck together. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about this entire idea of Michael Hage projecting similarly to Phillip Danault, but with more offensive production. Do you think Tony Marinaro and the folks on the show who talked about this are out to lunch, or do you think it's a fair comparison to make? Do you think Phillip Danault was so good defensively that it'd be difficult for anybody in a prospect setting to project similarly to him? I kind of understand that because Danault was so good, he was first-line caliber material who just didn't get any first-line caliber point production, but who did pretty much everything else value-wise to help out his team, so that might be seen as a really tall task. I don't know, you can let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Article will be linked in the description. It also has the video clip of the Sick podcast where Marinaro and co. went out and talked about this, so let me know your thoughts in the comment section below about the second Montreal Canadiens first-round pick, hometown guy, Michael Hage. I hope you enjoyed this video, and bye.